Hi, I'm Jago.
Hi, I'm Sam. We're both media team members here in Brno, and throughout the session we're going to be producing this podcast. In the podcast we're going to be talking about things like fake news, political apathy, Brexit of course, both of us being from the UK, and some environmental issues as well.
On top of that, we'll also be covering events of the session, so everyone in the UIP community can hear about what's been going on. We'll be interviewing some delegates about their experiences at the session, and we'll also be covering the city of Brno, interviewing some of the organising team who are from the city. On top of that, we'll interview the delegates, officials, and maybe even guests at the session about the issues that we're talking about on the podcast. Obviously, we're both media team members, and one of the issues which our media team cares about deeply is fake news. Fake news will be the first big topic we cover here on the podcast. Sam mentioned some others earlier. Obviously, fake news has been very much relevant recently with the Trump campaign even using it as a marketing strategy, selling $1 fake news bumper stickers. It's been described as ripping America apart by Katie Curry from Yahoo News, and it's generally been an incredibly big story and an incredibly influential story over the last year or so. I've got a couple of examples of fake news here, some of them believable and some of them completely unbelievable, but that's kind of the nature of fake news in the sense that some people believe that it's true because it is in some cases believable. So we've got the example, thevalleyreport.com gave woman arrested for defecating on boss desk, which is, it's not unbelievable, but at the same time sensational. Whereas Florida man died in meth lab explosion, although it was fake news, sounds a lot more believable. Fake news has also been used to influence political situations. As I mentioned Trump already earlier, there's also ABC News reported Obama signs executive order banning the Pledge of Allegiance in schools nationwide, clearly a politically motivated one. And one final example I have is The Guardian newspaper reported that the UKIP leader, Nigel Farage, an anti-European, was named a person of interest in the FBI's investigation into Donald Trump and Russia because of his close relationship with Donald Trump, which wasn't true, but clearly politically motivated and politically biased.
Why do we have fake news? Well, on the one hand, it kind of comes from these clickbait farms. Now, these are like massive online organisations that are set up purely to create sensational news stories. And these stories have the headlines that people click on. And when they click on them, it generates ad revenue. And that's just making, like, it brings in millions of dollars a year for these companies. But on the other hand, you have these attempts at political subversion, political motivations behind these stories, like what Jago mentioned in The Guardian with the report on Nigel Farage and UKIP. There's two very different sides to fake news, but they are interwoven in some ways as well, with like political motivation and economic motivation working side by side.
As Sam said, mainstream media have been purporting fake news as well on top of these clickbait farms and websites which are made for fake news. I mentioned The Guardian. A lot of American news sites and newspapers have not often purposefully peddled fake news, but have sometimes fallen into the same trap that everyday users on Facebook and social media fall into in believing the fake news, and they actually made reports in the end on pieces of news that were in the end fake.
One of the most startling examples of fake news happened during the US election campaign, where it was found that the top 20 performing fake news stories generated 8,711,000 shares, comments and reactions on Facebook. Whereas in comparison, the top 20 news stories covering the election campaign from reputable news sites garnered merely 7,367,000 shares, comments and reactions on Facebook. So there's a big difference between the interaction with fake news and the interaction with real mainstream media. It's reputable.
And everyone has an opinion about it. And because of this, we've decided that we're going to go around now and interview some delegates, some officials, and session participants in general about what they think about fake news, and hopefully we'll come back here and have some interesting opinions to talk about.
So I'm joined here by Matthias, one of the editors of the session, who has a particular interest in fake news. Matthias, why do you think fake news has such an impact and why people engage with it in such a way?
I think one of the main aspects about that is that people typically are, well, first of all, a bit lazy and they don't fact check at all. So what they do is they see something that they, believe to be true, something we call a confirmation bias. And they see certain facts that they perceive to be, this is relevant to what I believe, and they will accept it for truth without, checking if they actually are reading something factual or something that is just random pieces of sentences that, form fake news.
And what impact do you think that fake news is having on politics and our perception of political figures?
Well, I think it's quite interesting what we saw in the last American elections, where there were a lot of rumors going about that were not necessarily facts. And although we can't really measure it one by one, I think we saw that, for example, Hillary Clinton was damaged by these unchecked rumors. But I think it extends to more than simply politics. I think it also covers broader topics where feminism is one of those clear examples where in certain countries people believe that we're currently around third wave feminism that is about kill all men because that is not based on facts. This is based on what they expect to be. It might suit their personal opinion, it might suit their needs. And that combined with possibly cultural aspects, it might be one of those things that spreads it around. And people also feel that they will spread it around to further their own ideas and opinions. And when that happens, you get the point where, social media will pick up on that, but also when bigger newspapers go in that direction and publish something that is not fact-checked properly, people will spread that news. Imagine you have a newspaper with at least 1 million readers. It is people expect it to be it's a credible source. They expect them to have done their fact checking, and if they don't, they're not going to fact check a newspaper. They believe this is done, and I think that's another reason why it has such a big impact, not just on political scale, but on the global scale regarding many different topics.
Yeah, very interesting how you talk there about confirmation bias. It's something that Jago and I will be going back to the studio to talk about a bit more. Thank you very much for your time, Matthias. Really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure.
It was really interesting there, obviously, to hear all of the opinions of the session participants. A number of opinions and issues were raised. But I think one thing that all of the interviewees kept coming back to was this idea of Facebook feeds often getting clogged up with the same kind of ideas and the same opinions over and over again, and just promoting this kind of confirmation bias with regards to news and the news they want to consume rather than finding a critical standpoint on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to remember that, we all have our own opinions, and when we see things online that are aligned with those opinions that we have, we're much more likely to believe them, and even if it's untrue. And because of this on social media, fake news very easily finds readers who share it with more like-minded people. And that's one of the main reasons why fake news spreads so quickly and, like we mentioned earlier, garners so much attention. Sometimes even more attention than reputable news sources, purely because it's shared in circles of people that have very similar opinions, and when they see these opinions expressed in an article, they click on it and they interact with it.
And it's very interesting to talk about this in the sense of it being harnessed by political movements and the political parties. So if you look in the UK, where me and Sam are from, you have a movement on the left supporting Jeremy Corbyn called Momentum, and very recently there was a news story about the Conservative Party trying to have a number of groups like this group Momentum, just in order to basically create enough content that was pro-Conservative government, that it would get on people's feeds and it would kind of perpetuate this bias, natural bias that people have towards a certain opinion, and the kind of satisfaction they get from it being confirmed by what seems to be a reputable news source. And obviously that's a big issue, and something for all of the participants and all of the listeners from outside of the session to think about. And I'm sure you'll all form your own opinions about it, and you'll read about it, and hopefully, in the spirit of fact-checking and fake news, you'll go and try and find the truth. Now to move on to a section of the podcast where we'd like to just introduce you to the beautiful city that we're in at the moment, Brno. We're going to talk to one of the organisers, Marek, about Brno. He's lived here all his life and has a wealth of knowledge on the city, obviously, and I'm really excited to hear what he has to say about his hometown.
So now I'm here joined by Marek, one of the organisers of the session. He's from Brno, he's grown up here and knows a lot about the city. So Marek, do you want to tell us a little bit about Brno?
Of course. Thanks for having me on the podcast. So Brno is a city which has around 400,000 inhabitants. It's the second biggest city in the country, and it was founded almost a century ago. Situated on two rivers, Svatka and Svitava, which sort of formed the basis for the original city, which was quite small. Then, there were a lot of little villages around that historical center, which later joined the city, making it, this quite a big agglomeration, which it is now. Brno used to be quite industrial, and there was a big German population, or more like German speaking, so a lot of Austrians living in the city. A lot of Austrians had big factories that employed a lot of people, so there was a lot of industry. So you would have heavy industry, so there would be like plants to manufacture machines, clothing companies, like big textile manufacturers as well. Those sort of dissolved after the Second World War, so there wasn't that many of them anymore because of the communist era. But then after the Velvet Revolution in 1989, the city went on a new track and got more focused on services and more focused on education, higher education as well. So now there are 3 major universities in the city, a lot of international students, and generally a lot of students in here. So from a very industrial city, which it was like 100 years ago, it became more of a young, up-and-coming city with a lot of students and a lot of a lot happening in terms of culture and life in general. So it is deemed, one of the most up and coming cities in Central Europe, and I'm very proud that I'm from the city and that we can also bring EYP to Brno.
Excellent, Marek. Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thanks a lot.
Great to hear there from Marek about his city, and I'm sure over the course of the session, the delegates, the officials, and everyone in the UIP community will learn a little bit more about Brno and the centre of Europe, as the session theme goes, the heart of Europe. That's the first episode of the podcast. We're excited to share more episodes with you and to interview more of you to find out what you think about certain issues, the issues that are coming up. We're going to talk about political apathy, Brexit, environmental damage, things like that, big issues, and we're really excited to hear all of your opinions. And hopefully you're also excited for the next few days of the session with a load of great events coming up. It looks like it's going to be a good part of the session programme, and we'll check back with another podcast very shortly. Thank you.
This podcast was recorded and produced by Jago Lynch and Sam Stronge. Thank you to all of our guests, and stay tuned for the next instalment of the Brno podcast, coming on Monday morning.